In this lab, we'll be discussing the anatomy of the spinal cord reflex. One of the other functions of the spinal cord, in addition to sending sensory information from our body up to the brain for interpretation, or the brain sending motor information down to the body to respond, the spinal cord also controls a few reflexes. So we want to take a look at the reflex arc. For this lab, I'd like you to know that we have 5 different components of the reflex arc. So this is a picture from our book where we can see over here this individual's hand is about to touch a sharp object. It looks like it's a tack, but it could be something hot. It could be something very cold. What receives the information inside this individual's skin is the first component of our reflex arc, which is the receptor. All right, we have various receptors all over our body and the skin. So this is going to be the first component. Once the receptor has been activated, it's going to send the signal into the second component of the reflex arc. This here is this red neuron. This happens to be a sensory neuron, right? So the information would kind of follow my cursor this way, all the way into the back of the spinal cord. Right, so we can see here it's actually a sensory neuron. This is a unipolar neuron, and we can see that its cell body lives in this swelling right here, which is the posterior nerve root ganglion. The sensory neuron enters the posterior horn of the spinal cord, and it's going to synapse with the third component of a reflex arc. This is the neuron or neurons that are going to process the information. Right, this is what we call integration. They're kind of evaluating the information that's coming in from the sensory neuron and the receptor, and they make a decision, do we need to do something about it? So this would be the third component of the reflex arc. If something needs to be done, we see that the integrating center or the integrating neurons, they synapse. In this picture here, it's this black neuron right here. This would be the motor neuron. You can see the cell body lives in the anterior horn, and then the axon comes out the anterior root of the spinal nerve. This is going to carry the information out of the spinal cord to a part of the body that's going to respond. This right here would be a muscle that's going to actually pull away the hand from that threatening situation down over here, the tack. This fifth component we call the effector, right, the part that's going to respond. So the 5 parts I need you to know are the receptor, number 1, the sensory neuron, number 2, the integrating neuron or the integrating center, number 3. The motor neuron is going to be number 4. And then the part that's going to respond, the effector. So if we have a good understanding of this diagram, then our model is going to be really, really easy. We could see here, down over here we have a piece of skin. Right? You could recognize maybe the epidermis, the dermis, and then the sub-Q down over here. And they're showing in the skin a bunch of dendrites, some touch receptors, right, where there's various pressure receptors. All different types of receptors are in the skin. So the first component of this model, that's the reflex arc, is the receptor. The information then goes into this yellow neuron. You can see here we know it's a sensory neuron because it's going into the posterior root. There's a posterior root ganglion. So that's how we know it's the sensory neuron. That's the second component. The third component is the integrating neuron or the integrating center. I believe in your notes I put integrating center. Here I labeled it as integrating neuron. It's the same thing. This is the part of the spinal cord that's processing the information. If something needs to be done, this integrating neuron is going to synapse with the cell body of the motor neuron. Right? That lives in the anterior horn here, and then we can see the axon going out the anterior root into the spinal nerve. And this is the fourth component. So this orange neuron right here on this model is the motor neuron, component number 4. Finally, the part that's going to respond is in this case, the muscle. That would be the effector. Right? In our diagram, that was the muscle that pulled the extremity away from the tack. And that's the five components of the reflex arc.